Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Ananda podcast. This is Dylan, and we are here for episode 2 of our season 3. And we are here with somebody who has been a huge contributor to my life. His name is Kim Michaels. He's an author, a mystic, and a spiritual teacher. And he has written, gosh, how many books now? Over.
About 80.
You don't slow down, do you?
No, not so far.
Well, I'm super excited to have you on, Kim. You've personally had just such an impact on my life. I found your teachings 13 or 14 years ago. I was, I think like 13 or 14. And it was this really weird serendipitous situation where I kind of discovered your website. I think it was the Ask Real Jesus website or the Ascended Master Teachings website.
Right.
I was My mom was a follower of Wayne Dyer. She really loved Wayne Dyer, the New Age
Hmm.
teacher, and
Yeah.
read all of his books. And of course, riding in the car, I was always listening to his audiobooks, and he kept mentioning this person, Saint Germain. And I'm like, and the I am discourses, and I'm like, what is this Saint Germain? I've never heard of that before. I am discourses. Why does he keep quoting this book? And so I found the I am discourses online, and I ordered the book to my house, and I was immediately hooked. I mean, it just drew me in. It was the most transformative experience of my life. And I read the books and I was like, gosh, that's interesting. I'm gonna, look up Ascended Masters. And I typed that into Google, and the first website that came up was your teachings. And just
Oh,
from
wow.
there, I just went to town and read every piece of snippet of information I could find. And yeah, all these years later, I'm still here, and it's really transformed me and my psychology and my path in ways that I can't even describe to you. So I'm really excited to have you on, and I look forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. So Kim, I'd love for you to kind of you know give us the foundation of your path, and sort of where how you discover the spiritual path and what your story is and what's led you to this point.
Well, I mean, my path was not that different from so many other people. I mean, I've been on the spiritual path now for 48 years. So I met thousands of people who were also spiritual. And of course, when you look at spirituality, it's an enormously broad range, where there's many different teachings, many different teachers. But there's a lot of things that all people have in common. And you actually described it very beautifully. There just comes a point where you're ready to discover something, and most of us have probably known this before we discovered it. We were looking for something. And I knew that my whole life, my whole childhood. I grew up feeling a void, an empty hole inside of me. And it wasn't that I was unhappy. It wasn't that I couldn't get along with other people, that I couldn't function in society. But I just had this hole inside of me, and I didn't know what I was looking for because I didn't get anything growing up that there was anything to look for. You know, my parents were not religious. Denmark has Christianity is the state religion, and on the other hand, there was scientific materialism. And I couldn't identify with both of them, with any of them. I mean, I just Christianity, there was something missing there, and materialism. I just thought, there's got to be more to life than being an evolved monkey. And so I was 18. I moved away from home to go to college, and I was just in the new town I was in. I was just walking around one day, looking at things, and I found this used bookstore. I go in because I was always looking for things. But back then when I was young, there was no internet, so you had to find a physical book.
Yep.
And libraries, public libraries, didn't have spiritual books.
Hmm.
Bookstores didn't carry spiritual books. So I go into this used bookstore, and they have a small section with some spiritual books. And there's one called Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Not really the modern author's name, but and I just picked it out of the shelf and I opened it up, and there's some pictures of him and some other masters from the Himalayas. And I looked at these pictures, I closed the book, went over and bought it. So I go home, and in the following weekend, this happened to be on a Friday, uh, I was totally immersed in the book. I read it and I reread it, and it was like a whole new world opened up for me. I mean, I was just so, it was like, it was not an argument. It was not something I believed. I just knew this is real. And what I mean with that is there is a path to a higher state of consciousness. There's a purpose to my life other than materialistic goals. There's actually a goal I can strive towards, that is raising my consciousness. And so that's kind of how it started for me. And then I just knew, there was that spiritual side to life. Then very shortly after that, I met some people at college who were also spiritual, but they were into transcendental meditation. I don't know if have you ever heard of
Oh yeah, yeah.
TM?
My mom tried to get me into TM at one point.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Yeah, so she initiated me, or she had somebody initiate me. Paid the fee and everything, and it was
It's just it
nice.
was so big when
Yeah,
this was happened to me in 1976, right?
yeah,
So past millennium,
yeah,
and so I didn't know how you being younger, if you
yeah,
had even heard about it,
yeah.
because it seems to have declined somewhat since.
Yep. Yep. They have. But it was
Okay.
interesting because I remember asking the teacher, well, I love this feeling. So can I meditate for more than 20 minutes? And he's like, no, absolutely not. I was so taken aback. And I'm like, I think I'm going to go a different route then. Yeah.
They were very strict on rules
Yeah.
back then when I
Yeah.
was in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and but anyway, I went into that, and I met my first wife there, who was a meditation teacher, and we got married, and I actually took one of these teacher training courses, 4 months in Switzerland, and at the end of those 4 months, the last month we had some Vedic teachings and some different meditation techniques we were doing. And looking back, I just had so many of what you would call mystical or non-dual experiences. I mean, the whole month was just like I was not really in my normal state of mind. I was not really in my body, and but in TM there was not really much of an explanation for what this was and what this meant. It was just, yeah, you're supposed to have these experiences, and we were supposed to write them down because they were collecting all these experiences so they could come out and say, people have had millions of spiritual experiences doing TM. But there was no help for you individually to process it. And quite frankly, it blew my mind. I didn't think about it at the time, but I can look back later and I can see I was just blown away by experiencing that there's a different aspect of reality, that's so different from your normal everyday experience. And so and then, towards the end of the course, we had we had a videotape. Back then the Maharishi was the guru, and so, and nobody ever saw him really. But we saw videotapes of him. It was back when there was videotapes. Betamax cassette.
Yeah.
They were the biggest customer for Sony Betamax cassette
Really?
tapes. Yeah, video cassettes. And so they had these huge VCRs,
Yeah.
bigger than a
Yeah.
combined printer scanner today, huge
Yeah.
one. And but we and most of the tapes we watched, they were years old, done when he was younger, and he had a certain radiation back then. But then we watched the tape with him. I was just a few weeks old, but he was not at the UN, but he was talking to a UN assembly. And he was basically sitting there like this old man with a white beard, blaming the United Nations that they hadn't accepted TM, because if they had, we could have solved all the world problems. And all of a sudden, I looked at the guy and something shifted. I even said in my mind, I said, but he's got no light left. So compared to the earlier tapes, it was like there was no radiation from him. And it shocked me. It really shocked me. And this actually started me leaving TM. And then there was some other things in the TM movement. There was a big upheaval when I came back. Probably too much to go into that. And then my wife and I ended up leaving. And for several years, I was just in this no man's land, because I still had all these experiences of an alternative reality that I hadn't processed, and I didn't know what to do with them. I couldn't find any descriptions of it. Today, it would probably be what people call a Kundalini rising. I think that would probably be the closest description.
Yeah.
So this lasted for, yeah, 2, 3 years or something.
Hmm.
And then my first wife and I, we heard about Ascended Master teachings, and then we went into that. And a few years later, in 1987, we traveled to the United States, where there was this organization. You talked about the I Am movement.
Hmm.
But the later movement was the Summit Lighthouse, which was big at the time in the late 80s. It had tens of thousands of members. And so we traveled to the United States to check this out. And ever since then, I've been involved with Ascended Master teachings in one way or another.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned, that first experience when you went to Switzerland,
Mm-hmm.
um, having all those spiritual experiences. When I first found the teachings through you and through the summit, or the I Am movement, and then a
Yeah,
little bit of the summit, I was having similar experiences. And one thing that I noticed, and this happens, I think, to a lot of spiritual people, when they find the spiritual path, there's this honeymoon phase. And they
yeah,
become so, they have all these spiritual experiences. They feel like their world is transformed. And it's very easy to kind of create this closed system where you start to believe, oh, I must be this incredibly advanced student. I
yeah. I
must have,
recognize that.
I must have, my ego must have died. I remember talking to people in the group, and it's like, well, there's these teachings about these embodied, Buddhic level of consciousness life streams, and I must be one of those people, and it's like, looking back, it's completely absurd, but it's very easy to use that as a self-reinforcing system to validate the ego. And then
Yeah.
what I spent, years and years trying to actually see through that and break that down. Once I had been trapped in it, it kind of became a blind alley. But I see a lot of people do that. And I don't know if you experience similar situations with your spiritual
Oh, I
path.
think the honeymoon phase, that's a
Yeah.
really good expression.
Yeah.
And I think it's a grace, that
Yeah.
we are sort of given this period. But I also think part of it is because we didn't grow up in a spiritual environment.
Hmm.
I met many, many people, especially in the United States, who grew up in a Christian environment. But that's not what I call spiritual. That's why you have this saying, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Yeah.
And many people feel that way, that on the spiritual path, they couldn't really identify with Christianity. There was just something missing. And so I think it's, and then of course on the other side we have materialism. There's absolutely nothing beyond the physical world. And as spiritual people, we can't log into either of those. So we go up feeling, like I said, something is missing, and then suddenly we find it, some kind of spiritual teaching or spiritual path, and it's natural that we just want to explore. It's kind of like we have lived inside of a certain room uh, all of our lives. And then all of a sudden the door opens and we realize there's a whole mansion outside of that room. So you want to explore this, you want to explore that, you want to try this. People get into, astrology and chakras and numerology and
Hmm.
aura readings and this and that. And I think it's all fine for a time, because if you never go beyond that, you don't really log into what the path is about.
Yeah. And I think that's actually where a lot of people are stuck right now. And I think that's where we can bring in this concept of ascended masters, because there's this huge growing number of new age people who are reading spiritual books. They're starting to open their minds. They're starting to question the life that they grew up with whether it's the Christian ideology or the materialist ideology, which I had influence from both. But how do they take that next step? Maybe they feel like their growth is sort of stalled. And I know a lot of people like that. Their growth is stalled, and then maybe they start going into plant medicine, so they call it, and they start
Yeah,
experimenting with all these things and trying to
right.
really find, like, because they're almost obsessive compulsively consuming spiritual teachings, but they don't feel like they're really filling that perceived hole within themselves. So that's where I found the ascended masters to be incredibly beneficial. And maybe you can kind of dive into what are the ascended masters, and how can they help us on our growth.
Yeah, I mean, I have several videos where I explain this, what ascended masters are. But basically, we can look at it this way. We know everything is energy. Einstein told us that in 1905. But we haven't really understood what that means. So to me, it means that the material world we're in, even though matter appears solid, it's still vibrating energy. But it just vibrates within a certain spectrum of frequencies. And the reason why we don't experience anything beyond it is that our physical senses are tuned to the same frequencies that matter is made out of. And our minds are so tuned to the to the physical senses that most people don't see anything. But of course, our minds can tune in to other levels of vibration. And so the spiritual realm is simply another level of energy that vibrates at a higher frequencies than the material world. And of course, we tend to look at everything from a materialistic view. I remember, for example, when I first heard about auras, and most spiritual people heard there's an energy field around your physical body. And when I first heard about it, it was presented that the physical body produces the energy, but it's the other way around. There is an energy field, and it doesn't produce the physical body. The physical body is simply the most dense part of your total energy field. And so beyond the whole material world is the spiritual realm, which is higher vibrations, but the spiritual realm is actually what the material world is made out of. So if you could, they talk about a veil, Maya, illusion, which is a very known concept in the East. And if you could look behind that veil, you would just see that the material world is just a pocket in this larger spiritual realm. So the spiritual realm came first. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, the spiritual realm came first, and then the physical world. But who made it? And who made it were the spiritual beings at a higher level of consciousness than us. And I call them the ascended masters. You can call them, they have been called many other things throughout the ages, even angels or gods or devas or all kinds of things. But for many, many years, Earth was at such a low level of the collective consciousness that the ascended masters weren't allowed to stand out publicly. But in the late 1800s, that changed. And since then, they have been using that terminology, ascended masters, which is why I use it.
And so you,
oh
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, the ascended masters are our spiritual parents, and they created us. And we then took embodiment on Earth, which is a very dense planet. There are other planets than Earth with intelligent life, but Earth is a very dense planet. And it's a very difficult planet to be a spiritual person on. So we forgot our origin. We forgot where we came from. But the ascended masters are still there, and they are now in our spiritual teachers to help us get back to really realizing who we are, what kind of beings we are. Yeah. You just talked about Wayne Dyer. Your mom loved Wayne Dyer.
Yep.
Well, he has this saying, we are not a human being trying to have a spiritual experience. We are a spiritual being having a human experience.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's what we need to realize. We are spiritual beings.
And so you, through your experiences with the Ascended Masters, you eventually became a messenger yourself. Can you kind of explain that process of how the Ascended Masters communicate with us? I mean, there's kind of two ways. There's from within ourselves, the Ascended Masters communicate with us, but also there's been in the past 100 years, this process where the Ascended Masters communicate with us through messengers. Can you kind of explain that process? And yeah.
Well, it really boils down to this again, that Earth is a dense planet.
Yeah.
So, because I met many people, ascended master students, spiritual people who have said, well, why don't the masters just step forward in some undeniable manifestation in the sky, so that everybody can see they exist? It's the same as why doesn't God prove that he exists? Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that, that at the current level that Earth is at, plausible deniability needs to be maintained. So it has to be easy for people to deny that there's anything beyond the material world, that there's anything beyond the God that's portrayed in Christianity, for example, or Hinduism or whatever. And that means that the ascended master can't prove that they exist. And that's why they can't appear in some undeniable manifestations. So they appear, as you said, the most important way that the masters try to help people is intuitive. You get these inner intuitive experiences. It can be a prompting, like you found Saint Germain. You wanted to find Saint Germain. I found Yogananda's book.
Yeah.
That was guidance from above. And so many people I met, you can look back at your life and say, how did I ever find this? Why did I, at that particular time, go there and look for that book? Or why did I even get the idea to look for this? Where did that idea come from? And then that's how the masters guide us individually.
The still
But as
small
you said,
voice.
an inner voice, the small, still voice within. And so what they have also done is they have given public teachings where they train somebody to be a messenger for them. And it can happen in different ways. You can write down. I mean, many books have been inspired from the ascended level, for example, Course in Miracles, but others as well, and many authors have been inspired. I think Eckhart Tolle was inspired in the beginning, and Wayne Dyer was inspired by the Ascended Masters. I read quite a few of Wayne Dyer's books, and some of them you can see there's a certain inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, he was. My mom met him a few times. In Hawaii, he's quite lovely. Quite a. He's one of those people where everywhere he goes, he was just sort of felt like he was kind of in alignment. Like he would just meet people everywhere he went and would just kind of transform people's lives, just kind of give them a gift, and they would, like you'd meet a random person at a hotel. They said, "Oh, I was swimming, and I started drowning because this happened, and then all of a sudden this person grabbed me, and it was Wayne Dyer, and it was like like he was just kind of." Just the crazy
Yeah,
stories
yeah.
you heard from him. So it's funny.
But
Yeah.
that's because he was in attunement,
Yeah.
as you say,
Yeah.
with his higher self and with the Ascended Masters.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually glad that he, in the end of his life, he recognized that he had found Ascended Master teachings.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big step because many teachers are reluctant to do that.
Yep.
So anyway, so what I have been trained to do, and what a few other people have done, is to take messages from them. As I said, it can be spoken. I've written, but for me, it's spoken. I simply speak it. And the way I do it is basically, it's not really a mysterious process, but I've been trained to go into a neutral state of mind. And I sense when the masters want to give a dictation, which is most often when we have a conference.
Yeah.
It can be an online webinar, it can be a physical conference, like we're having one in August in Chicago. Yeah. And so I just tune in, and then I'm not in a trance like some channelers are, because I wouldn't do that myself. I wouldn't let somebody else take over my mind. I don't feel it's a violation of free will. But so, but it's not like I hear the words and repeat them. I just speak them. I hear them as they're being spoken through me, but I could stop at any time. And so I've been doing this since 2002, and I published the 80 books, but I have websites where there's more material available for free than in those 80 books.
Tons
so
of
you can literally spend years reading everything.
You even have a YouTube channel you recently started, and
yeah,
for the first probably 8 months, I didn't watch any videos. I knew that you had started making videos, but I was so deep into your other work, and I thought, what does he have on there that I haven't read already? So, but then I felt inspired one day while I was cleaning the house, and I started listening. And I've listened to every single video.
Oh, really?
And it's part of my morning routine. I wake up and there's a video by Kim Michaels, and it's just my favorite part of the day. And there's just so much incredible information there. And it's one of these things, with the Ascended Master teachings, it's like I'm so far down the rabbit hole that it can be difficult to kind of introduce somebody to it because there's just so much to kind of process, right? And you created kind of an introductory course through your YouTube where people can kind of start at step one and kind of go down the line so that they're acquainted and familiar with the concepts that are kind of used through your teaching.
Yeah, I started out doing a series where I called the Breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Breakthroughs on the spiritual path, and starting from number 1 and up. And I tried to kind of look back at my experience over all these years and all the people I met, and what is it that people need to know when they are new to the path. And so if people are interested, they can look at my channel, find those breakthrough videos and start watching them, give them some idea of what the spiritual path really is all about, and some of the experiences that it's like I've always said, why reinvent the wheel? When there are other people that have had similar experiences, why should I make the same mistakes that other people have made. Now, sometimes we need to make the same mistakes because we need to make them ourselves. That's fine. But we don't need to make all the same mistakes, so we can learn from each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things, and I want to, so I have a couple things I specifically want to talk about, but before I go into those, I want to talk about psychology. So psychology is a huge part of what you teach through your teachings. And, but it's spiritual psychology. It's a way of, so it's kind of, there's two, what I've noticed because I was also introduced to Yogananda's book, and I was introduced into the meditation movements and stuff. And I was even initiated into Kriya Yoga. And
Mm-hmm.
what I noticed is that, there's this in the new age spiritual movement, there's sort of this mindset where it's like, oh, you just need the spiritual experience, and that's what's going to raise your consciousness. And I think in many times that's true, but I think what you've mentioned is that it's everything on the spiritual path is about psychology. Our growth in consciousness, 100% and 100% dependent upon our psychological processes and letting go of what you call spirits within our consciousness. So I don't know if you can elaborate on
Selves.
that. Selves, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if
subconscious
you can
self.
elaborate on that briefly and kind of give people that process.
Yeah, but let's go back to what you talked about with the honeymoon phase,
Yeah.
because I think that's where a lot of people get sidetracked. Um, and it's understandable. I'm not trying to blame anybody for it, but it's just what I've seen is that a lot of people, they find a spiritual path and they have this awakening, as some people call it, and they might have really amazing, genuine spiritual experiences, and they discover all these teachings, and it's a wonderful period, like you said yourself. It's like you have this grace period where everything is wonderful. But then what happens is, after a certain time, people feel like their growth slows down. And the unfortunate thing I've seen happen to some people is that they get lured in by some of these teachers out there that are saying, well, now you are an awakened being because you had this or that experience. But see, one or a few spiritual experiences, no matter how amazing they are, doesn't mean that you have really made significant progress on the spiritual path. It might just mean you have discovered there is something. There's a higher state of consciousness. It doesn't mean you've attained it permanently. So it's like there's an underlying, ongoing path to your life. But on that path, you can have these peak experiences. But you still have to walk the staircase. Let's say it's a spiral staircase, and you can't skip steps. And this is one of the unfortunate things about our modern consumer society. Because what are we brought up to think? You find something. Oh yeah, here's something called spiritual path. I'm just going to whip out the plastic, and then I'm going to get results in 5 minutes. Right?
Buy my
And
course for $10,000, and I'll make you
exactly, and
enlightened.
you're guaranteed to be enlightened, or your money is wasted. And you look back at the spiritual traditions that have existed for thousands of years, and none of them talk about the instant enlightenment. They all say there's a path, you have to walk it. And why do you have to walk it? It's because it's not about getting a specific result. It's about moving forward on the process. So you integrate it. You are really, instead of just experiencing what it's like up there, you're gradually pulling yourself up there on a permanent basis. Mm-hmm. So what happens to a lot of people, they have that initial phase, and then their growth slows down. And at some level they feel it, but if they're so focused with their outer minds on, now I'm really something special, like you said, now I'm really this highly evolved being, after these few experiences, they will deny that their growth is slowing down. And so they won't know what to do. Well, they keep practicing. They keep studying. They keep talking to other people who are also denying that their process slow down. They keep reinforcing each other and pretending. It's what I call pretend spirituality. Mm-hmm. And so there comes a point where you just have to recognize that you cannot make significant progress on the spiritual path without looking at your own psychology. Jesus actually said it 2,000 years ago. Look at the beam in your own eye. And when you see the beam in your own eye, then you can see clearly the splinter in your brother's eye. But most people are just focused. They're also just looking out instead of looking in. So in our consumer culture, we are used to thinking, or we are programmed. And when we find the spiritual path, we think, oh, it's just a matter of finding the right teacher, having these experiences. So if I don't get the experiences from meditating, then I'll take ayahuasca, and then I'm guaranteed to get a blow my mind experience. And so they think it's about that, but it's not. It's about the process of raising your consciousness. And I think many people, unfortunately, overlook that.
And so part of that process is the letting go of selves, right?
Yeah, it is, because there are different ways to describe psychology, but the way I describe it, based on the teachings I've gotten from the Ascended Masters, is simply this: you can look at your life, and you can say, you can observe yourself in certain situations. You always react the same way.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you might get angry, or you might be submissive and feel powerless in certain situations. And it's because we are conscious beings. We are creating with our consciousness. So when we have a certain difficult situation where we don't know how to react to it, we are actually creating a structure in our subconscious minds for how to react to similar situations. And what we are creating is a self. It's like an entity, a being that lives in our subconscious minds. And the reason why I call it a self, you could call it a reactionary pattern, but the reason why I call it a self is that once it's created, it has a certain survival instinct. And so it will, if you have a self that reacts with anger, for example, it will want you to become angry, because when you become angry, you are qualifying energy with a lower vibration than love, and that feeds the self. And if you try to uncover the self and dissolve it, it will try to, project thoughts into your mind that confuse it so you can't see it. In other words, it wants to stay hidden. It wants to influence you, but it wants to stay hidden. It's also what some people call ego. It's just the ego is this big amorphous thing. It's actually easier to deal with it when you break it down into these smaller selves and say, oh, well, I have a self here that always reacts a certain way, so I can deal with that more easily. For example, anger. You can say, why do I become angry? Why do I believe that anger is a justifiable response or the only possible response? There's some illusion you have come to accept. The difficulty of this is it's often happened in past lives. Mm-hmm. Because you look back at the past on this planet, if you were embodied during the Second World War, the Middle Ages, imagine what traumatic situations we could have been exposed to.
It's one heck of a planet for the past few thousand years.
It is. It is. Easy. I mean, it's just a really, really difficult planet, especially for spiritual people, where we are very sensitive.
Yeah, and that's why you see. Oh, go ahead. No, please.
No.
Well, I was going to say that's why you see, in our modern democracies, there's this tremendous focus on psychology and people going to their therapist and dealing with their psychology. And it's because a lot more people are waking up and they're looking into their subconscious mind. They're like, oh my God, like I have a lot of work to do. The past few thousand years, their house has been trashed. And so now they have to do the cleanup work. And I think there's this general awareness starting to become more prominent,
Yeah, it is amazing what has happened, because I remember when I was a child back in the 1960s, here in Denmark, we had a special ambulance that was blue, and it was called the Blue Wagon. And that came when people had a psychiatric breakdown, when they were really going nuts. Then the Blue Wagon came. So what you always heard as a child, watch out, or the Blue Wagon is going to come and get you. So what I'm saying with this is that when I grew up, you had to be really crazy to go into therapy or go to a psychologist. But today it's changed so that more and more, especially younger people, my parents' generation, they're still not really on that wagon. They're waiting for the Blue Wagon. But so many young people I see, they're saying, hey, and I think it has something to do with bodybuilding. People said, why should I be satisfied with the shape my body had when I was as a result of being born and growing up? Why shouldn't I do something about my body? Well, now it's the mind. Yeah. Why should I be satisfied with the psychology I had? Because in my parents' generation, by the time you were an adult, you were locked in. Your psychology was what it was, and it would stay that way for the rest of your life. And more people in the younger generation are saying, why should that be the case? Why shouldn't I do something about it? And I think a lot of people are getting amazing results from therapy, from mindfulness, from various support groups. But there's a certain percent of people also that are ready to discover the spiritual path and go even further.
Yep.
And you can really only do that when you discover that you are a spiritual being
Mm.
and you accept reincarnation. Because to be honest with you, if you really start looking into your psychology, most people will find there is no way you can explain the difficulties or the traumas you uncover by what happened to you in this lifetime.
Mhm.
I know some people had a very difficult upbringing, but most people haven't had that difficult. So when you discover these deep traumas, you're saying, where did they come from? And the obvious answer is they came in a past life. And as I said, look at the past.
Yeah, and I know that firsthand. You know, for me, I think part of the reason why I found the spiritual path at 13 was because I had a lot more work to do than most people. So, you know, I came into this life in a fairly affluent family, you know, super normal childhood, but my goodness, um, the stuff I must have went through in past lives. I've been shown some things, and it's just, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you know, so much psychology to resolve, so much to work through, and I really don't know where I would be if it wasn't for these teachings about the selves and realizing that, you know, the spiritual path, it's not about building up this very special, very spiritual, very high, you know, sense of who you are. It's about letting go of the things that weigh you down, weigh your spirit down, weigh you down from expressing naturally who you were created to be. And so, you know, one of the things that, for instance, kind of releasing some of these selves. An example for me um, was for a lot of my life, you know, because I had this psychological mechanism where I wanted to be right all the time. I wanted to be special. I wanted to be above other
Oh, you
people.
too?
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, right. There was a certain moment where it was 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, and I just had this moment where I realized I like being wrong. And the realization was that I felt when I acknowledged in this certain situation that I was wrong, I felt a liberation of energy. I felt freed from this illusion that had kept me blinded to this need to always be right. And
Mm-hmm.
it felt like you had taken a 100-pound weight off my back. And I felt, wow, I like being wrong. I don't mind being wrong. Being wrong is a liberation because it's awakening me to the things that I'm not seeing that are holding me back. And from that moment, I felt like I could breathe. And I had way less of a reactionary pattern to people, or to my wife, for instance, when she was, you know, getting after me for doing something. And when I let go of that need to defend myself, it completely revolutionized the way that I related to people. And
Yeah.
that's sort of an example of what resolving psychology can do, you know?
Yeah. But that's also one of the difficult things to resolve
Mm-hmm.
because, we have, as growing up as spiritual people who didn't fit in with the Christian camp and didn't fit in the materialist camp, we've always been told we were wrong for having spiritual beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we find the spiritual movement, and now it turns out we were right all along. And so now it becomes very difficult to give up that sense that, oh, I was redeemed. I am really somebody special.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to say about your story there that I think, you know, the reason why you had a lot of things to resolve, I see this in myself, I see it in many spiritual people, is we have what I call a life plan or divine plan. And so I'm not saying every human being on earth can do this because they're not at that level of awareness, but spiritual people, before we come into this lifetime, we meet with the ascended masters who are our personal spiritual teachers. And all of us have at least one, usually several, that are our personal teachers. So we look towards the coming lifetime and we plan, what do we want to accomplish? And there's always two aspects of that plan. One is we need to overcome a certain psychology because it's blocking us from fulfilling other goals. It's like, the unresolved psychology makes us so focused on ourselves we can't really do anything for the world. And so this is the one aspect, and then we have the other aspect is what we want to do for the whole, how we want to help raise up the world. And you mentioned the Ascended Master Saint Germain. He's going to be the main master for the next 2,000 years, and he has elaborate plans for creating a golden age on Earth. But that golden age is not going to drop from the sky. It's going to be manifest by millions of people receiving ideas for how to improve some aspect of life. And so many, many spiritual people are attuned to Saint Germain, even if they have never heard about him. So that's usually the gift we want to bring. And so what I was getting back to your story, most of us decided, I want to work on the psychology as first, so I can get it out of the way so it doesn't stand in the way of giving my gift.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think when you can see that, it gives kind of a tremendous purpose to your life. Because for a
It
long
does.
time, it was very hard for me to find any purpose in being an embodiment on Earth. I didn't even know, I felt this drive to want to be an entrepreneur and want to create things and want to help the planet. But I would sit there with this idea, and I would just have absolutely there. I didn't feel any of this. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I didn't really want to do anything here, and
Mm-hmm.
when I started to kind of make the shift, and it's been even happening even more recently, of realizing that it's not about me. And
Yeah.
there was something that I came into embodiment to do, and there's something I want to give. And when I give, I actually receive more than when I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeking for something for myself. And tuning into Saint Germain's purpose, that greater flow of the river of life that's seeking to express itself on earth and raise up all people. That's what I've been trying to tune into more, and it's been giving me a tremendous sense of purpose. And actually piggybacking off that idea, I feel like we could there's just so much so many possible directions we could go in. But I know a tremendous amount of people who are, young, maybe young parents, families, um, and there's this sense of hopelessness. There's a sense of frustration in a number of different areas. And I wanted to kind of pick your brain on some things. You're a parent, right? I feel like you've mentioned once or
Yeah,
twice.
my children are adults now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm curious, through your journey, through your spiritual path, and gosh, everything that you've been through. You've lived in America, you've lived in Denmark, Estonia, all these different places, traveled,
Sweden, yeah.
yeah, done all the things. How did you bridge being a parent with your spiritual growth? Because my goodness, if there isn't a greater test than having two little ones, pulling at your ego every now and then, uh, I notice a tremendous amount of parents who just there's so much tension. They're trying to do things differently. Maybe they're trying to homeschool their kids because, especially in America, the school system is really messed up, they're having such a hard time uh, balancing everything. And so, what
Mm-hmm.
advice would you give from your own experience and just sort of what you see collectively right
Well, I'll probably have to say, don't do what I did. Do what I say,
now?
because I had extreme difficulties with this.
Okay,
I became a parent with my first wife when I was very young. I was only 20 when my first son was born,
same.
and I just wasn't ready to be
Yeah.
a father. I was just not ready. My first wife was, she wanted children, but and she was ready, but I wasn't. And so so what happened was we had two sons, and then we moved to the United States because of the Summit Lighthouse. We were in the Center Master Teachings, we were spiritual, and like many people, we wanted to do everything at once, you know. And I've seen many spiritual people do this. The Summit Lighthouse was actually, at least at the time, very much focused on children, and parents with children had their own school, a Montessori school, and everything. But they also had these very, very elaborate demands on what to do, spiritual practice and invoking spiritual light and living a certain way, like you said, education and this and that, a diet and all kinds of things. And people had tremendous trouble balancing it.
Mm.
And I think, I had just as much trouble as everybody else. But I think if there was one thing I would distill from that, it would be that you have to seriously consider the dysfunctional legacy that we have gotten from thousands of years of spiritual tradition, especially in the East. Take Yogananda. It was a wonderful book. He is a wonderful spiritual teacher, but he was a monk, right? He never had children. Uh, and he was in that guru tradition they have in India, where if you are really a spiritual person, you withdraw from society and you focus on what you call spiritual growth. So what we have is, this is an ancient version of what we have today, where I say materialism, there's nothing outside the material world. Christianity is only the God of the Bible. And in the East, if you're spiritual, you are a monk or a nun. You withdraw from the world. And that is an outdated idea, because we have shifted from the Piscean age to the Aquarian age. I assume many spiritual people are familiar with that idea. And in the Aquarian age, in the Piscean age, there was certain validity to people withdrawing from society. But in the Aquarian age, the challenge is to integrate spirituality in everyday life. So you have to, I think, if you really want to make it easier yourself, you have to look at your approach to spirituality and see, do you have this division? Here are certain daily activities that I have to do. I have to go to work. I have to raise my kids. I have to do the laundry. And here are these spiritual activities. And I never have enough time, especially when I have kids. I think many young people who are spiritual and have children, they feel that their children are pulling them away from their spiritual activities. Mm-hmm. And I think what you have to do is to look at your entire approach to spirituality and say, but my kids, my everyday life is part of my spiritual activity. It is part of my spiritual path. Mm-hmm. Because as you said yourself, nobody's better at pushing your buttons than your children.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
And when I say pushing the button, it means forcing you into a reactionary pattern. And that's your opportunity to discover, oh, I've got a subconscious self there. Yeah. Let me just look at this. Mm-hmm. So I actually think that all this old model of yogis withdrawing from society, I'm not saying it doesn't have a certain validity, and obviously most people are different. But in today's age, it's just too easy. Mm-hmm. Everything. I met a lot of spiritual people who think, oh, this is the ideal. This is how you should be. Yeah. But it's not, because it's just too easy. Yeah. You can like the Maharishi in Transcendental Meditation. He supposedly spent 12 years in a cave in the Himalayas before he discovered this meditation technique and came out. But how many times were his buttons pushed in those 12 years where he sat there in a completely controlled environment? Yep. You spend 5 minutes with a couple of 2-year-olds and you're going to make more progress than 12 years in a cave,
Well, that's
or at least
funny.
You have a chance to.
We homeschool our kids, and we have a little homeschool group. Okay.
Yeah.
We switch off houses. And, there is no greater test on this planet, I'm convinced, than when you're trying to write an email and you have 5 kids, screaming in your ear and jumping on you and yelling your name and throwing watermelon on the wall. It's something else,
Oh, yeah, it is.
There's this, there, especially in America, I think Europe, what I see, and I don't know if you would agree with this, but with these world dynamics, America is a young country. And it's sort of working through a lot of issues that maybe some of Europe worked out at an earlier age, because you see this tremendous conflict, this tremendous tension that's been boiling up. And I know you haven't been probably to America for a while, but there's this increasing polarization. And then there's sort of this group of people who are becoming increasingly dissatisfied. And there's this dream of, let's take our kids, let's move to Portugal. Let's, live this very, egalitarian lifestyle, and let's travel the world and all this sort of thing. And there's kind of this, there's this greater awareness towards that. But with that, there's, so many people who feel so stuck here. And I've kind of battled with this because, we're entrepreneurs and we have the ability to sort of have some flexibility. But part of me feels, well, is it in my divine plan to be here in America and hold a balance while this crazy country is trying to figure out what's going on? Or do I have the freedom of choice in the sense that, yeah, I should go have this experience with my family and, let this country work itself out? It's sort of this balance. And this is kind of my own personal tug of war. And I'm not sure if you have any advice for me personally, but then also other people who may be experiencing similar emotions.
Well, I do, obviously, because of my own experience. See, yeah. As I said, my wife and I had, first wife and I had children young, and then they were 6 and 9 years old when we moved to America. They didn't really speak English at the time. And it was, a very difficult experience. But it was, like you were saying, we were withdrawing from society to be spiritual, be in a spiritual environment. And, what you always have to realize that you can move physically, but you are taking your psyche with you. So you are having the same psychological challenges in a new environment, even though the environment is different. So there's always this dream of this paradise. Yep. That's why spiritual people have withdrawn from society, to go into this Tibetan monastery. And then they find they get into this Tibetan monastery, and the monks there are just as mean as the people they are used to dealing with on the street. And so, what have they gained?
Yeah.
And they're so there's always an environment, and I just you can't run away from yourself.
Right.
So you have to be very sure first that you're not running away from
Right.
trying to run away from yourself,
Yeah.
and you have to be very sure that you're not trying to run towards this imagined utopia
Yes.
that and this is actually, I have a series of videos where I talk about the concept of avatars, that many spiritual people are avatars
Yep.
because there are two kinds of planets in the universe. Earth is an unnatural planet, which is why we have all the conflict. And then there are natural planets where we don't have this. And there's a large number of spiritual people who volunteered to come to Earth from a natural planet. So we have some remembrance of how things can be
Mm-hmm.
on a natural planet. And that's what we are longing for. It's just not realistic that this can be found on Earth as it is right now. So, what I would say is that the best way is that people individually tune into the divine plan. And you mentioned, should I be here or hold the balance, or should I go somewhere else? But are those the only options?
Right. True.
You don't have to sit here passively and hold the balance. Maybe you could speak out
Correct.
and say, why are we in this situation? Why do we have all this conflict?
Mm.
And I think you are right about what you said about America. I lived in America for 22 years. I could have become a citizen, but I figured I would go back to Europe at some point. And so, what I saw in America is, like you said, America is a relatively young country. Some countries in Europe are almost 1,000 years old. So people have made the same mistakes over and over again so many times that they've seen the futility of it. But Americans have this, don't tell us how to live our lives over here. We're the greatest country on earth. We want to make our own mistakes, even if it takes us 500 years to work through it. And I think that's partly what's happening. In Europe, what has happened is that people they've seen so much conflict, so much warfare, that they just said, this is just nonsensical.
Yeah.
I mean, people from Denmark, when you look at what's happening with the presidential debate and the whole election thing, I'm not even talking about what I think about it. I'm just saying people look at it and they say, how can there be so much conflict over this?
Yeah.
How can Americans allow themselves to be so divided?
Yeah.
How is that going to help anybody? How is it going to help the country?
Yeah.
And so many countries in Europe, you've sort of just learned to deal with conflicts in a more constructive manner.
Yeah. Well, and also a lot of countries in Europe, and this is something that's coming up more as a topic in America, is you look at European countries, and a lot of them have this concern for the quality of the food that they're putting in their bodies, for the free healthcare, making sure that people aren't going without that sort of necessary medical care. The water, they care about the water quality, the air quality, and it's here in America, it's the wild, wild west still, and you look at the presidential options, and it's like, for a lot of young people, it's like, how are these the only options? How is this
Yeah.
the best is this the best we could come
Oh,
up
of course.
with?
I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
400 million people, and these are the people. These are the
These
ones
are the
we
only
pick.
two. This is the only choice we have. Yeah, but it ties in with what I was saying about Europe having had more time, because not only is it about conflict, it's also about what I saw very clearly in as a difference is that in most European countries there's more social awareness
Mhm.
than in America. America, it's more everybody is your own. You make your own luck.
Yep.
You're the rugged individualist.
Yep.
But in America, there's more of a social. I mean, in Europe, there's more social awareness. In America, in Denmark, it's unthinkable for most Danes that we couldn't have a public healthcare system, so that only those who have money can afford to go to the doctor when they get ill.
Mm.
It's just unthinkable.
Yeah.
We can't have people lying around dying in the street because they can't afford to go to the doctor.
Right. Yeah.
We can't have people dying 10 years earlier of a preventable disease that they could have gotten help with.
Yeah.
It's just unthinkable.
What a renegade idea.
But that was because there was a shift in social awareness where we realized we are actually in the same boat. We are in the same society, and we have to take care of each other.
Yeah.
And the reason why this hasn't happened in America yet is because in America you have a much stronger elite of the very, very rich people who don't want this social awareness.
Yeah. Well, that almost makes me wonder. My wife and I talk about this occasionally, and and maybe this is part of my own unresolved psychology, but I say, what is America going to have to go through to reach the level of awareness that Europe has reached in these ways? Like, what kind of suffering are people going to have to experience? And then the question is, well, do I want to be around for that? Do I want to be
Yeah.
around for that sort of chaos, or do I want to just be like, you know what, I want to have a different experience?
Hmm.
It's that's sort of the eternal, and so many people that we talk to, it's all the same conversations.
Yeah, and I
Like,
can totally understand that.
yeah,
But I think it's also a matter of tuning into your divine plan and
right.
saying, is it really in my divine plan to be part of the process and help the process?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can look at it. If all of the aware people leave, who's left to run things?
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe that's why you have these two presidential choices, because younger people haven't made their voice heard
Mm,
and said, we want something different.
right.
We don't want politics as usual.
Mm,
And I think if you look at it, the way I see it is that I look at the people who are, I won't even say they're following Trump, they're hypnotized by Trump.
mm-hmm.
And most of them are angry.
Yeah.
So his just like so many other people we see in history, I'm not going to mention names here because people tend to get very offended when I compare Trump to certain historical persons. But anyway, um, these people they tune in and they realize there's a certain group of Americans who feel that their life standard is being eroded, and that's because neo the new economic
Neoliberalism.
system,
Yeah,
neoliberalism,
neoliberalism. Yeah.
has concentrated more and more wealth in the hands of the elite.
Mm-hmm.
So people are realizing I'm not going to be as rich as my parents,
Yeah.
and so they're angry over that, and he's taking advantage of that.
Yep.
But I think there's an awful lot of young people who are not angry, but who just know and see, like yourself, there's a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And we want that better way without all the conflict. And it's also a matter of saying, you could say, what does the elite want? They want to split up the American people so they're fighting each other, instead of seeing that the problem really is the elite.
Mm-hmm.
So there needs to be a certain generation of people who are saying, let's not fight each other here. Let's look at what's the real problem
Mm-hmm.
and do something about that, the income inequality.
Yeah.
And, if all of those people leave,
Yeah.
who's going to be left to fight it out?
It's true.
I
And
mean, I'm not telling you what to do. You need to
no,
tune
of
in what
course.
is in your divine plan.
Yeah. Well, and that's the
Um,
thing. I notice a lot of people, they'll go into a reaction. So, they're mad at Biden, so they go into a reaction, say Trump's the answer, or they're mad at Trump, so they go into the reaction, say the other side's the answer. And I try to caution people and try to talk to people and ask them questions. Like, does it make sense to continue to have this ping pong match of one extreme to the other? Like, can we just look at the whole system and ask ourselves neutrally, how can we improve this? And
yeah.
I'd I'd like to say that America is sort of doing that, and I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens with the election, and what the discourse in America.
Well,
But
what America is going through right now is what I call black and white thinking.
mm-hmm,
I also talk about the epic mindset,
mm-hmm,
where you think that either this thing happens or the country is going to hell. It's like you put it in black and white terms, this or chaos.
mm-hmm,
And it's driven a lot by the Christian right, that if it isn't the biblical way, then it's all going to hell.
yep,
And so what I am talking about is the more aware people, they can see these are not the only option.
yep,
There are other options. And does it really have to be violence?
yeah, exactly.
I mean, I know that if you look at American movies compared to European movies, right? The typical American action movie
Yeah,
is the hero is really a peaceful guy. He just wants to live his life out in the mountains and not be disturbed. But there are these bad guys, and they just continue to be bad guys until he whips out the AR-15 and keeps shooting until nobody else is standing. And this solves the problem. So what does the American movie industry portray? This is how you solve problems, guys.
right.
But spiritual people, more aware people know, no, this is not the way we solve problems. That's what they realized in Europe after 1,000 years of warfare. And,
Mm,
you know,
yeah, it's so true. And I noticed because we live in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, so we're near like California, and I notice
mm-hmm.
talking to people recently, what they'll do is you see the reaction to Trump is a lot of these more traditionally liberal areas become more liberal. And so what people do is they feel like they can't go to the grocery store without being berated by a homeless person or this or that, or they feel these, so then what they do is they say, oh, well, Trump's the answer. So now there's all these spiritually aware people, generally
Hmm.
open-minded people, good people who are completely flipping to the other side. And they're just this ping pong match. And it's like you said, it's the black and white thinking. And what I'm trying to raise awareness on just generally is just balance and unity and oneness.
Hmm.
And people can make their own choices, whatever they believe is the best. But keeping that awareness of the middle way, as the Buddha talked about, is so
Yeah.
important. And
And I think I don't claim that I have the ultimate answer, but I think one possible way out of the situation is to create a third party.
well,
That's a center party
my wife is
where,
really, yeah, my
yeah,
wife is really into this one guy. I don't know if you've heard of Robert Kennedy.
yeah,
He's been, I mean, the mainstream media really, really hates him, but my wife is really into him, and he talks a lot about, he calls himself the Unity Party. He
hmm,
talks about, wanting to purify America's water and make sure the soil is clean and regenerating just our ties between each other and not being so polarized. And what's interesting is that, um, I don't think all of his ideas are perfect, but it's crazy how undemocratic our country has become, not even allowing him to debate, trying to get him off any ballots in states. Like,
hmm,
it's absolutely infuriating how our country it's an illusion of democracy, what it really is right now, unfortunately. And I know you've also commented where, there's certain forces in this world, Russia, China, who want to undermine democracy and want us to
hmm,
lose our faith in the democratic process.
yeah.
And it seems like that's really what is happening in America. People are losing faith in the democratic process, and it can go
But
to.
that's because you have to realize the way things are right now
Mhm.
is not the only way things can be in a democratic country.
Right.
And the dissatisfaction to me is a sign that America needs to step up to another level
Hmm.
in its democratic growth process.
Absolutely.
I mean, most European countries have several political parties,
Hmm.
and that creates its own dynamic. But at least there's more room for people to feel that they can find somebody that represents them.
Yeah.
I think there's a you just look at the Republican Party right now. It's taken over by the Trump loyalists, but there is a group of um, traditional conservatives who are saying it can't be all about this.
Hmm.
And there are some that are more centrist. There are also people in the Democratic Party who are more centrist. And I think that if there was a third party where people who are in the middle, I think most Americans are in the middle
Oh yeah.
of the
Yeah.
political spectrum,
Hmm.
where they could feel they're represented, I think that would be a way to at least diversify the debate. But the
Absolutely.
problem with this black and white debate is that diversity is seen as a threat.
Yeah. Hmm. It's true. Yeah, it's interesting. There's so much. I feel like there's so much that we could go into, and maybe we'll, have to have episode 2 or episode 3 to go into
Yeah,
more
we
of
can do
the.
that.
So if I really want to, I know we're already over an hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time.
No, but it's not about that. I've got plenty of time. But
Well, yeah, I really, really appreciate you coming on, and these conversations are so needed. And I think that the work you're doing through YouTube, getting your teachings out to more people, as well as I know that you're doing some other podcasts as well. I think it's really a great service to life, and I just want to truly thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you've done. I know that you try to be as neutral as possible, but it has made a total difference for me. So thank you. And
no, I appreciate that. But I also want to say that if I don't present myself as a spiritual teacher,
mhm,
and the reason for this is that you have again this almost stigma of what a spiritual teacher is going back through the millennia, including in the East with a guru. And the thing is, the whole idea that one person can change the world is deeply, deeply dysfunctional.
mm,
It takes millions of people, to change the world, including people like yourself and people who are listening to your podcast. Many, many people. And we don't have to agree on everything. That's the thing. But we just have to point out that there's a higher level of awareness than what we're seeing right now. Like I said, does everything have to be polarized? Is violence really the only solution? Do we have to automatically hate or not talk to people who disagree with us? Can we not find a better way? And there's a lot of people that need to do that and speak out, because right now what's happened is that the dialogue has been taken over by the people who are in the extremes. And in Denmark we always talk about the silent majority, but the majority has never had a better opportunity to speak out than right now. But many people haven't started doing it, and that's what needs to happen.
Beautifully said. Well, my friends, thank you for listening to the Ananda podcast with Kim Michaels. If you want to find Kim's work, you can go to Kim Michaels on YouTube. There's
Yeah.
his personal website, kimmichaels.info. There's ascendedmasteranswers.com, Ascended Master Light, More Publish. There's all, I know all the websites by heart.
Yeah. But kimmichaels.info, you can find links to all the others.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you guys for listening to the Ananda podcast. We'll see you next time. And thank you, Kim Michaels.
Thank you.